Did you get my email on consanguineous marriage rates in the Middle East? And my oasis theory in which this behaviour is advantageous in geographic areas, which are always productive and need to be guarded by specific tribes? No, I didn't. But that would make sense, I suppose.
Yes, there's many payoffs to consanguineous mating. It's really not right to say that inbreeding is just bad. I know of one advantage which is very consistent with his hypothesis he calls the oasis model. If you have a faster life history population, and you need to increase the payoff to very small amounts of communitarian effort, so this would be effort allocated to the purposes of maintaining the integrity of a group. And you have a group made up of fast life history individuals who have lower trust. Then, if you increase the genetic similarity among these individuals, you can increase the payoff to even nugatory allocations of communitarian effort. So, it's a way of maxing out the benefits to very, very small effort allocation into maintaining community structure. You make every bit of communitarian effort pay, and you do this by having a bigger inclusive fitness premium by having increased genetic closeness. The other thing is resource consolidation over time. So, if you have lineages that are highly related to each other, and you have things like bridal dowries, you have this system of bride wealth. So you're actually giving resources in exchange for mating. You can consolidate those resources within a single family by just having all the matings occurring within a single family. Therefore, no resources need to leave that family. Everything is consolidated. So, vertical transmission of assets and wealth can be consolidated within family lines through inbreeding. The other advantage, which is interesting, and this is a concept that very few people have ever heard of, is inbreeding vigor. Now, most people are familiar with inbreeding depression, which is increasing homozygosity, causing genetic diseases, but there are certain traits for which you want to inbreed. And these traits are traits which don't breed true. Like, for example, MHC major histocompatibility alleles associated with the immune system, which tend to break up by design through normal reproduction and recombination to the point where the heritability of these immunological phenotypes is actually negative. The offspring tend to be dissimilar to the parents rather than the other way around. So, you end up with dissimilarity by design because you want to bet hedge against novel parasites. But, let's say you're not having to deal with novel parasites. Let's say you're living in an area where there's a specific kind or set of parasites, and those parasites are constantly trying to outwit your immune system, and you're racing in a coevolutionary arms race with them. Then, instead of outbreeding and breaking up your locally co-adapted MHC complex genes, you want to inbreed in order to maintain the fidelity of those MHC complex genes and ensure that your offspring are as much like you as possible. Because they're not having to deal with novel parasites, they're having to deal with the same parasites over and over again and may need to consolidate all their local adaptations in order to maintain this zero-sum game essentially of co-adaptation with the local parasites. This may go hand in hand with a syndrome of behavioral immunological traits, such as high levels of xenophobia, high levels of religiosity, high levels of ethnocentrism, these being an adaptation to parasite burden.
So as malaria declined in England, there would have been less pressure towards cousin marriage for that reason.
That's right, and that is across countries, and I have data. On this, the strongest predictor of the frequency of the prevalence of cousin marriage is parasite stress. It doesn't really matter how you measure it. You can measure it in terms of disability-adjusted life years for infectious diseases, which is the World Health Organization measure. You can measure it using Murray and Sharla's work on historical parasite prevalence and disease burdens. You always get the same result. Levels of cousin marriage strongly track. They strongly co-vary with respect to parasites. Stress suggesting that one of the advantages is inbreeding vigor. And a good example where we know this is true is in the case of malaria adaptations, in instances where you have sickle cell anemia. Because in order to increase the heterozygosity of your genome for sickle cell alleles, you actually want to be slightly inbred with respect to those alleles. And there is therefore a very definite payoff to having higher levels of inbreeding in ecologies where you have high malaria, because the fitness payoff to being a heterozygote for sickle cell anemia in terms of malaria resistance is extremely high. So, this would be a really good example of a well-studied instance of inbreeding vigor, where there's a fitness benefit to being inbred.
Now we have another question. Consanguinity in Islamic society would lower IQ, but polygamy would raise IQ. Does this offset?
Well, I can answer this directly because there's a paper in the Journal of Intelligence on inbreeding depression and IQ in a study of 72 countries. And what they found was that there is no effect after you control for sundry covariates, like democratization and education and GDP. There's actually no effect of national level consanguinity on national level IQ. The two seem to be independent of one another, which is interesting. And I think the reason for this is because where consanguinity occurs, it has been practiced for hundreds or maybe even thousands of years in the presence of strong purifying selection, which has been operating for a sufficiently long period of time, that it's removed from the populations the most deleterious allele combinations. Polygamy seems to be a part of the same ecology as consanguinity. They both have their roots in parasite stress. If you outbreed, you lose adaptations to parasites, they'll break up. And that means your population becomes vulnerable to that parasite. So, that's why in addition to consanguinity, you get xenophobia, you get collectivism. You get all these inward-looking traits, what Randy Thornhill, he calls it conservative values. It's nothing of the sort. It's a kind of ethnocentric, ethno-linguistic centrism, essentially, among populations living in high parasite stress environments. Polygamy seems to function along similar lines.
There's a group selection thing as well. The cousin marriage means that if the society is unstable, then it helps them to create a functioning society where people can trust each other more because the men can be sure that their fellow members of the society are related to them. So it's a kind of insurance policy to some extent against cuckoldry. It's a society of people that don't trust each other very much, and that gives them the advantage.